2 years after humanity's dramatic resignation from the Galactic Conclave, the Milky Way faced an existential threat. The mysterious fleet approaching from beyond the galactic rim had been confirmed as hostile by scout ships that never returned from their observation missions. Elena Reyes stood in the Earth Union Assembly Hall, addressing an emergency gathering of human leaders. Behind her, a large screen displayed the latest sensor data. Over 3,000 vessels of unknown design, moving in perfect formation toward the populated regions of the galaxy. Their technology far surpasses anything we've seen, Elena explained, her voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. Based on energy readings, a single one of their ships could likely destroy an entire battle fleet of any known species. Murmurs of concern filled the chamber. The fragmented conclave has attempted to coordinate a defense, she continued, but their efforts have fallen into familiar patterns of mistrust and political positioning. The human-mediated treaties are holding, but regional cooperation isn't enough against this threat. Admiral Zhang stood to address the assembly. We've run simulations based on the available data. No single species has the military capacity to repel this invasion. Even alliances of 5 or 6 major powers would fall quickly. Only a truly unified response from all spacefaring species might have a chance, and that level of cooperation hasn't existed since. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what he meant, since humanity walked away. Elena stepped forward again. I have a proposal. It's bold and may seem counterintuitive given our path over the past 2 years, but I believe it represents our best hope, not just for humanity, but for all sentient life in our galaxy. The chamber fell silent as she outlined her plan. 1 week later, the largest gathering of alien representatives ever assembled in Sol space orbited the cradle of humanity. Representatives from all 87 recognized spacefaring species had answered Elena's call, plus a dozen species that had been excluded from the original conclave for various political reasons. The massive new station constructed in Earth orbit dwarfed even the Grand Conclave headquarters. Unlike the rigid, formal design of the conclave chambers, this station had been built with spaces that accommodated every biology and cultural need. There were water-filled sections for aquatic species, high-gravity areas for those from dense worlds, and even methane atmosphere chambers for the silicon-based life forms from the outer systems. In the main assembly hall, Elena Reyes stood at the center of a circular stage surrounded by the gathered representatives of the galaxy. The tense faces of dozens of different species looked to her, awaiting her words. 2 years ago, I walked away from the Galactic Conclave, she began, her voice carrying through translators to every being present. Humanity withdrew from our role as the galaxy's mediators because the old system wasn't working. We were taken for granted, expected to solve everyone's problems while sacrificing our own needs. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of many species she had once negotiated with. We're not going back to that system, she said firmly. But we're also not going to stand by while an existential threat approaches our shared home. Behind her, detailed holograms displayed the approaching extragalactic fleet. This enemy doesn't care about our political differences or ancient grudges. They won't distinguish between Vraxian and Missouri, between human and Tiscatal. They represent a threat to all life as we know it, and they can only be defeated if we stand together. The Vraxian High Marshal rose from his seat. What exactly are you proposing, Commander Reyes? A temporary alliance until this threat is dealt with? Elena shook her head. I'm proposing something more lasting. Not a resurrection of the old conclave, but something new. A galactic alliance where humanity doesn't carry the weight alone, where each species contributes its unique perspective, and where we all recognize our interdependence. She began to outline the structure of this new alliance. Unlike the conclave, leadership would rotate among species. Decision-making would be distributed rather than centralized. Most importantly, no single species would be expected to bear the burden of maintaining peace alone. Humanity will take a role, Elena explained, not as the permanent mediators this time, but as one voice among many, offering our particular gift for understanding without judgment, alongside the gifts that each of your species brings. As she spoke, something remarkable happened. species that had been bitter enemies just months before began to engage with each other, offering suggestions and building on each other's ideas. The approaching threat had created urgency, but the new framework Elena proposed had created possibility. Within hours, the basic structure of the alliance had been agreed upon. Within a day, working groups were forming to address specific aspects of both the immediate threat and the long-term organization. By the week's end, the new alliance was formed, born of necessity but built on principles that the old conclave had only paid lip service to. 1 month later, the combined fleet of the newly formed Galactic Alliance prepared to meet the extragalactic invaders. Ships of every design and size, from tiny Jex fighters to massive Vraxian dreadnoughts, moved in coordinated formations that would have been impossible to achieve just months before. On the bridge of Earth's flagship, Elena watched the breathtaking display on the main view screen. Thousands of vessels from hundreds of different worlds, now moving as one fleet under a unified command structure. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," Admiral Zhang said, standing beside her. 2 years ago, half of these species wouldn't even sit in the same room together. "Sometimes you have to break something to rebuild it properly," Elena replied, thinking back to that moment when she had placed her translator on the table and walked away from the conclave. Her communication console chimed with an incoming transmission. To her surprise, it was from the Vraxian High Marshal, commanding their forces on the fleet's right flank. "Commander Reyes," the reptilian leader said, his scales a calm blue despite the impending battle. "I wanted to say something before we engage the enemy." "I'm listening, Marshal," Elena replied. The Vraxian's expression was solemn. "We panicked when you left. All of us did. We had grown so dependent on humans solving our problems that we forgot how to solve them ourselves." Elena nodded but remained silent, letting him continue. "But perhaps we needed that panic to grow up," the Marshal said. "Your withdrawal forced us to face our weaknesses, and now as we prepare to defend our galaxy together, I believe we are stronger for it." Looking at the diverse fleet on her view screen, Elena had to agree. The alliance that had formed was not perfect. No arrangement between such different species could be. But it was honest in a way the conclave never had been. Each species now participated by choice, contributing their strengths while acknowledging their weaknesses. "Good hunting, Marshal," Elena said. "We'll talk more after we win this battle." As the communication ended, Elena gave the order to move the fleet forward. The ships accelerated in perfect unison. Thousands of different designs created by hundreds of different cultures now united in common purpose. Humanity was no longer apart from galactic politics, but they were no longer its unwilling servants either. They had found their rightful place, one thread in a stronger, more beautiful tapestry. A thread that could only shine when properly woven among all the others. 2 years ago, humanity had walked away from galactic politics, and the universe had panicked. That panic had been painful, but necessary, a step toward true cooperation, rather than dependence. Now, facing an outside threat, the species of the Milky Way moved forward together. Different, but united, independent, but connected. And as the combined fleet jumped to light speed toward its rendezvous with destiny, Elena knew that whatever the outcome of the coming battle, the galaxy had already won its most important victory. End of Part 6. The end. The tension in the Galactic Council chambers had barely subsided when Ambassador Jane Drayton returned to the human embassy aboard the space station Titania. Earth's situation had grown far more complicated than anyone had expected. As she walked down the long hallway, the whispers of her colleagues reached her ears, each one filled with concern, frustration, and uncertainty. The implications of humanity's refusal to accept the peace offers had created divisions, even within their own delegation. Inside the embassy, the delegation was divided into 2 factions. On one side were those who still believed in diplomacy, who hoped that somehow humanity could work out an agreement with the Galactic Council. On the other side were the more radical members, who had begun to question if Earth should even continue participating in the Council at all. The idea of breaking away, becoming an independent power in the galaxy, was gaining support. Drayton stepped into the central meeting room, where a heated argument was already underway. A group of diplomats, their faces a mixture of worry and determination, stood gathered around a large holographic map of the galaxy. Their voices grew louder as they discussed the recent developments. Earth was now at a crossroads. "What are we going to do?" asked Samuel, a middle-aged man with graying hair, his voice filled with frustration. "The Zorathians are practically calling for us to be expelled. If we continue like this, we'll have no allies left." "I told you," replied Drayton, her voice sharp. "We cannot back down. The Zorathians are just one race. We've already made our stance clear. If we keep submitting to their demands, we'll lose everything that makes us human. We must stand firm." "But we're alienating everyone," said Rael, a younger diplomat who had joined the embassy just a few months earlier. "The council might not be perfect, but we need to keep the peace. This could lead to war, and we'll be the ones at the center of it." Drayton's eyes narrowed. "Peace? What kind of peace do we get when we have to surrender our autonomy just to fit in? The kind of peace the council offers isn't real. It's an illusion. Earth's independence is worth more than any peace they're trying to sell us." Rael was about to protest when an older, more experienced diplomat, Commander Alara, stepped forward. Alara was an expert in military strategy and had been one of the key figures in negotiating Earth's position in the galaxy. Her calm demeanor and wealth of experience often made her the voice of reason. "Ambassador, I think you're right," Commander Alara said, her voice steady. "But we must consider what the future holds. Earth is on the verge of an arms race and we need allies. If we push away the council, it may be too late to regain their trust." Drayton stood silently for a moment, her fingers tapping the edge of the table. The stakes had never been higher. On one hand, she understood the importance of securing alliances for Earth's survival. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the fact that the Council's demands for peace came with strings attached, strings that would tie humanity down. As she prepared to speak, the doors to the meeting room opened, and another figure stepped in, General Markov, Earth's top military commander. His presence immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room. Markov was a tall man, his expression grim, and his uniform looked like it had seen its share of battles. There was no doubt that Markov was the embodiment of humanity's resolve. If anyone could keep Earth from being pushed into submission, it was him. "We need to talk, Ambassador," General Markov said, his voice low but firm. He gestured for Drayton to follow him to a private corner of the room. Once they were out of earshot of the others, Markov leaned in slightly. "Jane, I've been monitoring the situation closely. Earth's military has been steadily increasing its capabilities, and the Zorathians aren't the only ones getting nervous. The Lorian fleet is on high alert, and the Navra have begun moving their forces. The Council isn't just upset, they're scared." Drayton raised an eyebrow. "Scared? Of us?" Markov nodded. "Yes, they underestimated us, and now they see humanity as a potential threat, not just another species to be pacified. And with the way things are going, we might have just triggered something much bigger than we realize." Drayton let out a long breath. "I know we've made enemies, but I won't back down. Not after everything humanity has fought for." "We don't need to back down," Markov replied, his tone turning more urgent. "But we need to be prepared. The last thing we want is to end up in a war we can't win. I think it's time we took a different approach, meaning we start making some allies. We've been too focused on rejecting the Council's offers. There are plenty of factions in the galaxy that are unhappy with the status quo. Some of them see humanity as a way to tip the scales." Drayton's eyes narrowed. "You're suggesting we find new allies? Build a coalition?" Markov gave a grim smile. "Exactly. Earth doesn't have to rely on the Council anymore. If we start aligning ourselves with other races who are dissatisfied with the current power structure, we could create a new balance, one where humanity has a seat at the table." For a moment, Drayton was silent. The idea was dangerous, but it was also tempting. Humanity could become a central figure in a new galactic order. But at what cost? Before Drayton could respond, Rael approached them, his face pale. "Ambassador, you need to see this." Rail handed her a data pad, and Drayton's eyes scanned the latest report. It was from the Zorathians. The message was short, but the meaning was clear. Humanity's rejection of the peace offers would have consequences. The Zorathian Empire was prepared to take action, possibly military action. The weight of the situation pressed down on Drayton's chest. "It's begun," she muttered. "The galaxy is already starting to fracture." Markov's voice cut through the silence. "We have a choice. We can either face this head-on, or we can wait until it's too late." Drayton turned to the others in the room. She knew what had to be done. Humanity could no longer afford to stay neutral. If they were going to stand strong, they would need to move quickly and carefully. The Council had already begun to show its true face, and humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer guaranteed. The question now was whether Earth could rise to the challenge or be crushed under the weight of galactic politics. As she turned back to the map of the galaxy, Drayton's mind raced. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Earth was not going to be silenced. Not now, not ever. The tension in the Galactic Council had reached new heights. News of humanity's continued defiance spread across the galaxy like wildfire. What had once been seen as a minor diplomatic disagreement was now escalating into a full-blown crisis. The representatives from the various races had been summoned to a special session of the Council, an emergency meeting that would determine the fate of humanity within the galactic order. Ambassador Jane Drayton arrived at the Council chambers with a heavy heart. As she entered the vast hall, the eyes of the galaxy's most powerful leaders were fixed upon her. The atmosphere was charged with uncertainty, and the silence in the room was deafening. The Council chamber was a place of grandiose architecture. Tall columns stretched upward toward the high ceilings, and holographic displays flickered in the air. The room, which once symbolized peace and diplomacy, now felt like a battlefield. Around the central table, delegates from the major galactic races sat, their expressions grim. "Ambassador Drayton," said the voice of the Zorathian delegate, a massive figure whose presence alone could instill fear. His green eyes gleamed with anger, and his claws scraped the table as he spoke. "Your refusal to accept our peace terms has placed the entire galaxy in jeopardy. What do you have to say for yourself?" Drayton stood tall, her posture unwavering, despite the pressure. "We are not rejecting peace," she began, her voice clear and firm. "What we are rejecting is the idea of being subjugated. Peace should never come at the cost of our freedom." The room buzzed with murmurs, and she could feel the weight of hundreds of years of tradition pressing down on her. To reject the Council's peace offers was not just an act of defiance. It was a challenge to the very foundation of galactic diplomacy. The room waited for her to continue. "We have no interest in war," Drayton continued, "but we will not be coerced into submission. Humanity's independence is our priority. We believe that true peace can only come when all races, including humanity, are treated as equals." The Zorathian delegate's voice grew louder. "You speak of equality, but you have no understanding of the power dynamics at play here. The Council was formed to maintain peace in the galaxy. We cannot allow one species to threaten the delicate balance we've worked so hard to create." Drayton's expression remained calm. "And I cannot allow our people to be treated as lesser beings in a galaxy that claims to value peace. If peace means bending to your will, then I will not accept it." The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. The delegate from the Lori, an ancient race known for their wisdom and neutrality, spoke up, his voice like a soft whisper but carrying the weight of centuries of experience. "Ambassador Drayton," the Lorian delegate began, his three eyes studying her intently. "Perhaps there is another way. Perhaps we should reconsider the nature of these peace offers. Perhaps it is not your rejection of peace that troubles us, but the way in which it is presented. Could there be room for compromise?" Drayton turned to the Lorian delegate, grateful for his measured words. "I am willing to negotiate," she said, her voice calm. "But only on the condition that humanity's voice is heard, and our autonomy is respected." The tension in the room was palpable as the delegates exchanged glances. The council was divided, and the situation was becoming increasingly volatile. Some were beginning to question whether humanity had the right to reject the council's terms, while others were beginning to see Drayton's point, that true peace could only exist if all races were equal. "You're wasting time, Ambassador," said the Navra delegate, a fierce warrior race whose gaze could melt steel. "You cannot play these games. Humanity is too small a player to resist the Council's will. You have already caused enough damage. The longer you resist, the more enemies you will make." "I am not playing games," Drayton replied, her voice growing more determined. "I am protecting my people. We will stand up for ourselves regardless of the consequences." The Zorathian delegate slammed his fist onto the table. "This is unacceptable. We will not stand by and watch as your arrogance endangers us all." Before the situation could escalate further, a soft but insistent voice cut through the chaos. "Perhaps it is time to consider humanity's strength," said a new voice, one that had not yet spoken in the meeting. It was the voice of the Lorian fleet commander who had arrived late to the session. Her appearance was striking, with elongated limbs and intricate armor that shimmered with ancient patterns. She was a well-respected figure, known for her strategic brilliance and unwavering loyalty to peace. "Humanity may be young, but they are not weak," she continued. "We have seen their capabilities firsthand, their technological advancements, their military potential. These cannot be ignored. It is time to stop treating them as novices and recognize that they are a force to be reckoned with." Drayton's heart lifted at the Lorian fleet commander's words. For the first time, someone was speaking in humanity's favor. Her eyes met the Lorian commander's, and she nodded in gratitude. The Zorathian delegate growled in frustration. "You speak of humanity's potential, but that only makes them more dangerous. If they are allowed to grow unchecked, they could disrupt the delicate balance we've maintained for centuries." The room fell silent as the council members pondered the implications of the Lorian fleet commander's words. Humanity's rejection of peace was no longer just a matter of diplomatic tension. It had become a symbol of strength, and the galaxy was starting to take notice. Drayton knew the path ahead would not be easy. The council was divided, and the consequences of humanity's actions were still unfolding. But in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Humanity had proven that they would not be cowed, that they had the strength to stand up for themselves no matter the cost. As the meeting came to a close, Drayton made her way back to the human embassy, her thoughts racing. The future of Earth was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer a passive player in the galaxy. They had drawn a line in the sand, and there was no turning back now. The galaxy would have to decide whether to accept humanity as an equal or face the consequences of rejecting them. And Drayton knew with every fiber of her being that humanity's voice would be heard. The tension in the galaxy was palpable, spreading like wildfire through the stars. News of humanity's defiance had reached every corner of the galaxy, and the consequences were beginning to unfold. The Galactic Council, once a unified force for peace, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. The once respected assembly had become a battleground for diplomacy and war. Ambassador Jane Drayton sat at her desk in the human embassy, staring at the glowing datapad in front of her. The latest reports from Earth were filled with alarming news. Humanity was strengthening its defenses, stockpiling weapons, and preparing for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. The human fleet was expanding, and military leaders were calling for full readiness, anticipating the worst. "I knew it was coming," Drayton muttered to herself, rubbing her temples as she tried to process the information. She had hoped for a peaceful resolution, but the refusal of the Galactic Council to recognize humanity's independence had left them with little choice. Earth had been left no option but to prepare for conflict. Drayton's communicator beeped, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a secure message from General Markov, the human military commander. She activated it, and his face appeared on the screen, looking as stern as ever. "We've reached a critical point." Markov's voice was steady but laced with urgency. "The Zorathians and Navra are already mobilizing. They've made it clear that if we don't back down, they will take action. Our intelligence suggests that a few other factions are starting to rally behind us, but we're still vastly outnumbered. Drayton took a deep breath. The reality of the situation was settling in. What's our next move, General? We need to show strength, Markov said. If we can demonstrate that humanity won't be intimidated, we might be able to buy ourselves some time. But time is running out. Drayton nodded, her mind racing. We've always prided ourselves on our independence. We can't back down now. Not when Earth's future is at stake. Markov's expression softened slightly. I know, Jane. But we have to be prepared for what comes next. If diplomacy fails, we'll need to defend our way of life. And we won't be alone. Some races see what we're doing as a challenge, but others are beginning to see us as a symbol. We're not just fighting for Earth's survival anymore. We're fighting for the future of all those who want to stand against the Council's control. Drayton's thoughts shifted to the growing support from other factions. She had always believed that humanity could stand on its own, but now, that belief was taking on a deeper meaning. Could they unite with others who were dissatisfied with the Council? Could they truly form an alliance that would change the course of history? I'll have to get in touch with the Lorian fleet commander, Drayton said, her mind already moving ahead. If they're willing to stand with us, they could be key in tipping the balance. You might not have much time, Markov warned. The Zarathians are already massing their forces near our borders. We need to make a decision soon. Drayton ended the communication, feeling a weight settle over her. The galaxy was no longer a place of peaceful negotiations. It was a battlefield, and humanity was about to be thrust into the heart of it. The days that followed were filled with frantic preparation. Drayton worked tirelessly to coordinate Earth's defense efforts while also seeking new alliances. She reached out to the Lorian fleet commander, hoping to solidify the tentative support they had spoken of in the previous council meeting. But there was no guarantee that the Lori would stand firm when faced with the might of the Council's established powers. The Lorii, ancient and wise, had always preferred neutrality. They had rarely taken sides in galactic conflicts, and their decision to align with humanity was uncertain. Yet Drayton had to try. If humanity could secure a powerful ally like the Lori, it might be enough to shift the balance. Late one evening, she received a message from the Lorian commander. The message was short but promising. The Lori would meet with human representatives to discuss a possible alliance. It was a step in the right direction, but Drayton knew the talks would be delicate. The galaxy was watching closely, and the stakes were higher than ever. Meanwhile, General Markov's reports grew increasingly alarming. The human fleet was ready for battle, but their forces were still outnumbered by the combined strength of the Zarathians, Navra, and other galactic powers. Earth's military might have been built quickly, but it wasn't enough to face down the full might of the Council's war machines. Despite the looming threat of war, Drayton found herself conflicted. She knew that this was not the path she had hoped for. No one wanted a galactic war, but humanity's insistence on its independence had left them with little choice. She had hoped for diplomacy, for peace, but it seemed as though the galaxy had already made up its mind. A few days later, the Lorian fleet commander arrived at the human embassy. Drayton greeted her with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The Lorian commander, a tall figure with shimmering armor, spoke in soft tones, her voice calm but commanding. "We have watched humanity's rise with interest, Ambassador," the Lorian commander said. "We do not take sides lightly, but we see the potential for a new era. An era where the Galactic Council is no longer the sole authority. You are not alone in your desire for independence. There are others who feel as you do." Drayton's heart raced as the Lorian commander continued. "We will stand with you, but we are not the only ones. The coalition is growing. If you are willing to take a stand, we will join you. Together, we may not only survive this conflict, we may change the galaxy." The words were a beacon of hope, but they also carried weight. Drayton understood the gravity of the decision. An alliance with the Lorii, along with the support of other like-minded factions, could give humanity the strength to face the galactic powers that sought to control them. But the road ahead was fraught with danger. War would not be easy, and the outcome was uncertain. The Council was soon to receive a final warning from humanity. The message was clear. Earth would not bend, and if peace was to be found, it would have to be based on mutual respect and equality. Drayton knew that this would be the turning point. The galaxy would either accept humanity as an equal or face the consequences of rejecting them. Humanity was no longer a passive player in galactic affairs. They had declared their independence, and the galaxy would either rise with them or stand against them. As the human fleet prepared to make its stand, Drayton stood on the bridge of the command ship, looking out into the stars. The galaxy was vast, but humanity was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in history, humanity was no longer just a participant in the galaxy. They were becoming its leaders, its challengers, and its defenders. The warpath had begun. The calm of the space station Titania was shattered by the sound of alarms. Ambassador Jane Drayton rushed down the hallway, her mind racing. She had received a report that the situation had taken a turn for the worse. The coalition, the fragile alliance of races that had begun to rally behind humanity, was now facing opposition from all sides. The Zorathians had mobilized their fleets, and the Navra were positioning their forces near Earth's borders. The Council had given humanity an ultimatum: accept their peace terms or face the consequences. But humanity was no longer willing to back down. Drayton entered the command room, where General Markov was already overseeing the latest reports. The tension in the air was thick as military officers and diplomats exchanged urgent messages. Drayton's eyes scanned the room, taking in the chaos. She had known this day would come, but seeing it unfold before her eyes was another matter. "Ambassador," Markov said, his voice low but urgent. "The Zorathians and Navra have already launched small skirmishes near our borders. They're testing our defenses. If we don't act fast, we'll be drawn into a full-scale war." Drayton nodded, her mind working quickly. "We have to hold our ground. The coalition is counting on us." "The coalition isn't the only one watching," Markov replied. "The Council has called for an emergency session. Some of the more peaceful races, like the Lorii, are trying to hold back the more aggressive factions. But we're losing support. We need to decide whether to keep fighting or seek some kind of negotiated settlement." Drayton's heart sank. If we back down now, it will send the message that humanity is just another pawn in the Council's game. We can't do that. We can't let them take our independence. Markov's face hardened. "I know, but we're not fighting just for independence anymore. We're fighting for survival. There are factions within the Council who see us as a threat, not just because of our military strength, but because we refuse to bend to their will. We're making enemies." Drayton turned away, gazing out the viewport at the vastness of space. The stars were beautiful, but the galaxy now felt like a battleground. Humanity had once been a small player in the grand scheme of things, but now they were at the center of a power struggle that would change the course of galactic history. "What do you suggest, General?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with doubt. "Do we fight for our freedom, or do we attempt to negotiate one last time?" Markov stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers. "There's a third option. We don't negotiate, but we don't fight alone. We need to reach out to the other races who are fed up with the Council's control. The coalition might be small, but it's growing. If we can bring more systems into the fold, we might have the strength to make the Council listen." Drayton felt a flicker of hope. It was risky, but it was the only path forward that didn't involve surrender. "I'll reach out to the coalition leaders. If we can unite them, we might be able to force the Council to accept a new order, one where humanity and the other races are truly equal." But as the words left her lips, she knew it wouldn't be easy. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and even the slightest mistake could tip the scales in favor of the Council's most powerful factions. Days passed in a blur of meetings, communications, and strategic planning. Drayton worked tirelessly to rally the coalition, sending messages to the Lorii, the Ithrani, and several smaller factions who had expressed interest in standing with humanity. Each race had its own reasons for resisting the Council. Some were tired of the endless negotiations that led nowhere, while others had suffered under the Council's rule and saw humanity as a symbol of defiance. But as Drayton had feared, not everyone in the coalition was as committed to the cause as she was. There were still those who, despite their dislike of the Council, hesitated to break away entirely. They feared the consequences of challenging the established order. The Lorian fleet commander, a key ally in humanity's struggle, had been the most vocal about caution. She had expressed concern over the risks involved in forming an all-out rebellion. Her race had never engaged in war, preferring instead to seek peaceful solutions. But even she understood that this time, peace might not be an option. "I understand your hesitation," Drayton said during one of their private meetings. "But the Council isn't going to change. The longer we wait, the stronger they become. We must act now, before it's too late." The Lorian commander, known for her wisdom and calm demeanor, looked deeply troubled. "I agree with you, Ambassador. But our people have no experience with such conflict. We may not have the resources or the military strength to hold our own against the Council's full might." "We don't need to defeat them," Drayton said, her voice firm. "We just need to make them realize that we are no longer willing to be pushed around. We're not asking for their approval anymore. We're taking our place among the stars." The Lorian commander nodded slowly. "Then we will stand with you. But we need your promise, Ambassador. This will not be an easy fight. Many lives will be lost and the galaxy will change in ways we cannot predict." Drayton met her gaze, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. "I know, but we have no other choice." As the days turned into weeks, the coalition began to strengthen. More races, disillusioned by the Council's control, joined the cause. The small but determined fleet of Earth, supported by the Lori and others, began to grow. And though humanity was still outnumbered, they had one thing no one else could match: resolve. The Council, meanwhile, grew more impatient. Drayton received word that a final ultimatum would be issued. Humanity must either submit to the Council's will or face the consequences of an all-out war. It was clear that the Council was not interested in negotiating anymore, and so the stage was set. The Coalition's forces, now united under a single banner, would stand together against the might of the Galactic Council. It would be a battle, not just for Earth's future, but for the future of all those who sought true freedom in a galaxy ruled by the powerful. The countdown had begun, and there would be no turning back. The time had come. Ambassador Jane Drayton stood at the observation window of the flagship Independence, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars stretched endlessly in all directions, a reminder of how small humanity had once been in the grand scheme of things. But now, Earth and its allies were on the edge of something bigger than anyone could have imagined. They were no longer passive participants in the galaxy. They were standing against the might of the Galactic Council, ready to fight for their place in the universe. "Ambassador," General Markov's voice interrupted her thoughts. He entered the observation deck, his face set in a grim expression. The human fleet was ready. The coalition had gathered in full force, a diverse group of races united in their resistance against the Council. But Markov knew this would not be an easy fight. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the Council did not: the will to stand up for their independence. "We're ready," Markov said, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of the situation. "But I need to know if you're truly ready to see this through. If we go to war, there will be no going back." Drayton turned to face him, her expression firm. "We've already come this far. We can't back down now. This isn't just about Earth anymore. It's about the future of every race in this galaxy that wants to live without the Council's chains." Markov nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "I'll make the final preparations. The fleets are in position. We just need your signal." Drayton felt the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. It had been a long journey, one filled with challenges, risks, and impossible choices. But now, the galaxy would either accept humanity's place among the stars, or it would be forced to face the consequences. Back on Earth, the situation was no less tense. Drayton had been in constant communication with her people, keeping them informed of the Coalition's movements. The human military had put everything on the line for this moment. Families across Earth were preparing for the worst. But there was a sense of determination that hadn't been there before. People no longer saw themselves as a small part of a bigger system. They had found their voice, and they were ready to defend it. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council, the stakes had never been higher. The Council had issued their final ultimatum. Humanity would either accept the peace terms or face the full might of the galactic fleets. The Zorathians, Navra, and other powerful factions stood ready to crush humanity's resistance. They had underestimated Earth's resolve, and now they were paying the price. Drayton had watched the Council's response unfold from the safety of the Independence. She had seen the smug faces of those who believed humanity would eventually bend to their will. And now they were about to learn the truth. Humanity would not be silenced, and for the first time in galactic history they would stand as equals. "Ambassador," came a voice from behind her. Drayton turned to see the Lorian fleet commander, accompanied by several other coalition leaders. Their faces were set with determination, but there was also a hint of uncertainty in their eyes. "We're ready to fight with you, Ambassador," the Lorian commander said. "But I must warn you, we're not as prepared as we would like to be. The Council's forces are formidable. This will be a battle of survival." Drayton nodded. "I know, but we have to make them see. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for a future where every race has the right to stand on its own, free from domination." The other leaders exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others uncertain but resolute. Humanity had inspired them to stand up against the Council's oppression. For once they saw the possibility of a galaxy where peace wasn't about submission, but about mutual respect. "It's not just about winning this battle," Drayton continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's about proving that freedom is worth fighting for no matter the cost. If we win today, we'll change the galaxy forever." The Lorian commander placed a hand on Drayton's shoulder, her alien features softening with understanding. "Then let us fight, Ambassador, for freedom, for peace, and for the future of all our people." The Independence and its fleet moved into position. Drayton stood at the bridge, watching as the Coalition's ships, human, Lorian, Ithrani, and others, formed a line against the darkness of space. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. The countdown to battle had begun. The Council's fleet arrived shortly after, a massive force of Zorathian warships, Navra destroyers, and smaller vessels from various factions loyal to the Council. They came in overwhelming numbers, but the Abra coalition was not intimidated. They had come for one reason: to protect their right to exist as free people. On the Independence, Drayton received the signal. The time for diplomacy was over. She stood tall, giving her final command. "Send the message. We're not backing down. Engage the enemy." The crew moved swiftly, and within moments, the first shots rang out across the stars. The battle had begun. The first wave of the conflict was intense. The Zorathians, eager to assert their dominance, launched a powerful attack on the Coalition's forces. But the humans and their allies fought back with a fierce determination. The Independence and its fleet were outnumbered, but they were faster, more agile, and more determined than any of the Council's forces had anticipated. The battle raged on. The vacuum of space filled with explosions, blinding flashes of energy, and the soundless roar of war. The Coalition's ships fought bravely, knowing that each victory, no matter how small, brought them closer to a galaxy where they could live free from the Council's control. Drayton watched from the bridge, her heart pounding as she saw the human fleet move with precision, outmaneuvering the Zorathian warships. The once impossible fight was now turning in their favor. But even as the Coalition gained ground, Drayton knew that this was only the beginning. The Council's might was vast, and the war would not be won in one battle. This would be a struggle that would define the future of the galaxy. Hours passed and the battle showed no signs of stopping. But as the sun rose on the horizon of Earth, a message came through. The Zorathian flagship had been crippled, and the Navra fleet had begun retreating. It was a victory, but not the end. Humanity had proven their strength, their resolve, and their unwillingness to be controlled. As Drayton stood on the bridge looking out into the stars, she realized that the galaxy would never be the same. The Council's power had been shattered, and humanity had emerged as a force to be reckoned with. Today, we won not just a battle, Drayton whispered to herself, but the future. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had just taken its first steps toward leading it.